Hi, everyone. We're so happy folks could join us this afternoon for our session on designing high quality remote learning. My name is Shari, and you'll hear more about the organization I work with, Transcend. We're the ones who are facilitating today's content. I'm going to hand it over to Jane, who I know has been having some internet issues, but I think she has rejoined us and she's going to tee us up for today's session. Jane, you're currently on mute.
Hi, everybody. We had some technical difficulties on our end here. Too many space heaters, I believe. But I'd like to welcome you to this special event, this special ECLC event. It's part of the series Teaching and Learning in a Pandemic and making remote learning come alive. We're just so happy to have you all here today and commend you for being here because it's that time before vacation when everybody's feeling really itchy and utsy and not able to concentrate. So, but I promise you that this is a treat. And in fact, it's been a few years that I've been wanting to bring Transcend into the ECLC. It's an organization that is about 6 years old, that everything it touches is high quality. That has been my experience from the very beginning. Their materials are the best, and the work with school districts around the country and the partnerships that they have are all just truly incredible. So I am very happy to welcome today Megan Roberts. Maybe you guys can wave when you, yeah, thank you, Megan. Marielle Narcisa. There's Marielle, Shari Lawrence, and hi, Shari, and Cynthia Leck. So they are going to lead us today in what I know is going to be an awesome experience. And they've done a ton of work on remote learning, which I know we are all thinking about that these days, and especially perhaps, depending on what your district is doing, right before a snowstorm. There may no longer be snow days in a lot of places because of the pandemic and its introduction of hybrid learning and remote learning. But so I am just delighted. And I think that we can probably get started. I just want to say that look at our mission. Transcend supports communities to create and spread extraordinary, equitable learning environments. They have many partners all around the country and work with a whole variety of different kinds of schools and districts. Very nimble. And I would say that the watchword of the organization is innovation. So let's make it better. And I think we're all, I mean, the national motto is going to be build back better, but I think we all have an opportunity here to teach and learn differently as we move from where we are now into recovery once people get vaccinated. So, and Transcend is right there with innovation, ready for people really wherever you are in your journey, but taking you to a new place. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it back to you guys. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you, ECLC, for showing up and investing in ECLC. And we're just delighted to have everybody all here together.
Thank you, Jane, for that wonderful, wonderful introduction. Much better than I could have done. So I'm going to skip my tee up. And before we jump into today's content, I first wanted to share some community agreements with you all that I'm going to invite folks to lean into today. I also want to acknowledge that I know you all have community agreements that you use in other spaces. So if there are community agreements you would like to add to our list, I'm going to invite you to share those in the Zoom chat. And I'm going to pause just for a moment so folks can read over what I have shared on the screen. And if there are, what I'm going to invite folks to also share in our Zoom chat right now, if there are any community agreements that you want to lean into during our time together. During today's session, we're going to do a lot of collaboration. You'll be talking in pairs, you'll be talking in small groups. We're also going to invite folks to share out into our whole group space. So I know one agreement that I particularly want to lean into as a facilitator is be present and stay engaged. Jane shared at the beginning of the call, we're creeping up on vacation time. We're towards the end of the week. It's also my birthday week. Um, and so I know I'm feeling the edge of like it's almost Christmas time, vacation time, and so I'm going to do my best to stay present and be engaged. I'm also here with my nieces and nephews in New York City, and so you might hear them in the background as they're playing. Thank you, Emily, for the birthday wish. And I see Peggy is putting into chat. She also is leading into be present, and Megan is saying truth, mine, and others. If there are other agreements folks would like to share with us in the Zoom chat, I'll give you just a moment to share which agreement you're going to lean into. Thanks again for the birthday wish. I see another be present. I see from Rachel, assume the best and seek to understand. And I'll remind folks as we go into a longer breakout of our community agreements again, so that we can make sure that we are creating a safe and vulnerable and collaborative space with one another. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Megan, to share more about the content we'll cover in today's session.
Yeah, so what are we going to do in our 90 minutes together today? Our hope is that you will walk away with a deeper understanding of the science of learning and development and how you can use the science of learning and development to help improve learning in your classrooms, especially during remote learning. We hope you will have lots of ideas and inspiration to try out, and that you'll feel prepared to take this resource that we're sharing with you today and to use it independently to continue to evolve the great work that you're already doing in your classrooms and buildings. So let's kick it off. We're going to ask you in a moment to share a story about a challenge that you're currently facing during remote learning related to instruction. But to give you some space and some inspiration, I'll first share a challenge that I faced. So before coming to Transcend, I was a teacher for 10 years, and a bit of that was virtual. When I was studying for a master's degree, I taught online in a pilot program, which provided small group pullout support during school time for high school students with special needs. And I taught a writing support class, which is, of course, every student's favorite class. And when I taught virtually, a big challenge that I had was that my students struggled with work completion. Many times they didn't hand things in, and if they did, it was often incomplete, or I didn't feel like there was a lot of time spent on the assignment. And when I think about that problem, I always think about one of my students, a young boy named Owen. And he was a chatty kid, and he was sometimes silly, but like in the way that you really need kids to be silly sometimes during virtual learning, because it injects life into the space. And because of his energy, he worked really well with his peers. He was engaged and like working on activities when we were learning together in class, but he rarely turned in work that was done asynchronously. And I'll always give him the benefit of the doubt, but like more than one time, I got a very beautifully named Google Doc, like Owen's figurative language writing assignment. And then the document was completely blank, and which he swears there's a technological glitch that was deleting his work, even though there was no edit history. So things like that were happening. And when I asked Owen how I could support him, he would say things like, I hate writing, or like writing about reading is so boring, and I'm just not a writer. And he was never clear on like, did something happen that made you feel this way about writing? He could never really articulate what it was that instilled this belief in him, but he was very clear that him and writing like did not get along. And honestly, it was really difficult for me because he didn't produce enough writing for me to be able to like really diagnose what his strengths were or what he was struggling with, because there just wasn't enough output. And I spoke with his caregiver, who was his grandmother, and I got the feeling that she was struggling to help him, support him with technology, especially a lot of the Google Docs and suite that we were using at the time. And I didn't know how to change his attitude about writing. and independent work. And it felt so much more difficult virtually because I couldn't like watch and diagnose where he was hitting walls and barriers. And I felt really helpless for how to show up for him. So, and if you click on the slide, I took a quick snapshot of like one of the works that he produced. It actually has some stuff there that you can see a little bit of strengths and weaknesses, but it was never enough for me to really dive in and give him the support that he needed. So now we're going to turn it over to you, and we'd love for you to think about an instructional challenge that you face in relation to remote learning. And we're going to pop you into breakout groups with a pair. You'll have about 7 minutes. So 1 minute to introduce yourselves and get familiar. And then you'll have 6 minutes for each of you to share your challenge, and feel free to share whatever is currently resonating with you at this moment.
Awesome. Thanks for the lovely introduction, James. Awesome. Looks like we're about half of us are back. More. Beautiful. Welcome back. I hope you had a great opportunity to meet each other, start building a relationship, connect over your shared experiences, and also share some challenges that maybe were different from each other. Who knows? We're going to get a chance to talk more about those challenges, think more about them and what might be sort of influencing and driving those challenges, as well as how we might solve some of those challenges throughout the course of today. And before we start that though, instead of sharing now, I'm going to give a little bit of a framework, a way to think about learning, so that you can start applying that and analyzing your challenges. So don't forget what your challenge was. Don't forget what your partner's challenge was. Keep those in the back of your mind as we go into this next phase. So remote learning is really hard. We know this. We've experienced it. We've heard it. But we also know that there's ways that we can actually design experiences, no matter whether it's in person or remote, that either really support or that really detract from equitable learning. And one of the ways to help us do that, and the reasons we know that, is the science of learning and development, which explains a lot of how learning actually happens. So Transcend has spent a good amount of time digging into this research, which spans like a whole lot of disciplines, from psychology to cognitive science, neuroscience, sociology, education research. We put a lot of it together to try to help understand how learning happens, so that when we're thinking about school and reinventing what school looks like, it is grounded in what we know about learning and about equitable learning. And so we've created, I'll hold it up here, we've created a very long summary of this research, right? It is not short, it is about 60 pages. And then some lovely cards that Shari's holding up as well. So we've created a lot of content around this, but it can be a lot to take in at once. And so we've experimented with another format, which is a short video, which we're gonna engage with now. It's about 8 minutes. While you're watching this video, I want you to consider which of the factors in this framework about learning, there's 4 of them, I'll introduce them here briefly: cognition, motivation, identity, and individual variability. Which of those factors was really at play within your own challenge story? Which of them might have been driving the difficulties you were facing, or that your students were facing, or that student that you discussed in your breakout group was facing, and why? So just keep that question in the back of your mind as you're watching this video. It's a short animation, and then we'll come back together and dig into what those implications were and why those challenges were arising for you.
Many questions come up when designing learning environments. One of the most important is, how does learning happen? This is a complicated question. Luckily, research is providing us with more and more information to help answer it. At Transcend, we've dug into a great deal of this research, and we've synthesized it according to 4 factors that help us understand how learning happens. These include cognition, motivation, identity, and individual variability. Let's consider these one by one, starting with cognition. A range of cognitive processes influence learning. These can be complex, but here is one way to understand them. We have a range of experiences every day, and these influence learning. These experiences result from the tasks we engage in, the people we interact with, and the overall environment. These experiences contribute to the development of new thoughts, emotions, sensations, and may even bring to mind past memories. Our mind may begin to actively and consciously grapple with some of these thoughts, feelings, sensations, and memories. This happens in working memory. Our minds are bombarded by millions of pieces of information every second, but only some information is consciously grappled with by working memory based on what we direct our focused attention at. The information we don't attend to is mostly forgotten. The amount of information one's working memory is grappling with at any given time is called cognitive load. Having a manageable cognitive load is important to learning. Research suggests we are able to grapple with somewhere between 3 and 7 pieces or chunks of information at a time, depending on factors like age and relevant existing knowledge and skills. As we grapple with information in working memory, we begin the process of encoding it into our long-term memory. Long-term memory is able to hold an almost infinite amount of information. Encoding is more meaningful and long-lasting when we develop schemas. Schemas connect ideas together into chunks based on common themes and other relationships. Schemas are like magnets for new information and can support ongoing learning. Emotions can also make encoding meaningful and resonant. For example, experiencing something new while in a state of joy and amazement can make one remember it, along with the emotions felt at the time. We pull thoughts and emotions from our long-term memory back to working memory to help us make decisions, take actions, and learn new things. This process is called retrieval. When we retrieve things, it also helps us further remember or encode them. This is why practice is so powerful. For practice to be effective, it needs to focus on challenging but doable skills, and it needs to occur in frequent, focused intervals across a diversity of contexts. Practice also needs to be coupled with high-quality feedback that is timely enough and specific enough to help us understand mistakes and improve. Finally, metacognitive thinking, or thinking about your own thinking, can also support encoding. When we think metacognitively, we reflect, set goals, plan, consider our own progress, and make adjustments to improve, all of which can foster deeper learning. All of this is incredibly hard work. It requires deep engagement, and it's hard to be engaged if you're not motivated. Luckily, research tells us a lot about what motivates us. First, motivation flows when we perceive that what we're learning has value to us. This value may spring from the interest we have in what's being learned, how the learning is happening, or who the learning is happening with. Another way that motivation is built and sustained is through self-efficacy, or the belief in one's innate ability to achieve a goal. To feel efficacious, we need to believe we have the knowledge and skills to be successful at learning something. These beliefs are built up by working hard and then experiencing success. Like anything, with repeated practice, these beliefs become cemented in long-term memory and inform future behaviors. We are also more motivated when we have a sense of control over our learning. This sense of control may stem from shaping the goals we're working toward and how we achieve them, as well as knowing our performance is a matter of our own effort and is not hindered by things outside our control, like a lack of time, resources, or support. Finally, our emotional state directly impacts motivation. Some emotional states are constructive when we're trying to learn. However, feelings such as anxiety, fear, or depression can damage motivation. Having a secure and integrated sense of identity can also support learning. Our identities stem from how we make meaning of our unique combination of personalities, physical characteristics, group memberships, values, beliefs, attitudes, life experiences, and more. Individuals who develop self-understanding and act in alignment with their values, interests, and goals tend to live happier, healthier, and more successful lives. Identities evolve over time through a process of exploring who one is, committing to different identity markers, and then re-exploring. When we feel a sense of belonging within our community, it helps to affirm and strengthen our identity. It can be a source of motivation, and supports learning. More specifically, research indicates that those with a positive sense of belonging engage in fewer problem behaviors, are more open to feedback, take advantage of educational opportunities at a higher rate, have more positive attitudes, and experience less depression. For some of us, our self-understanding and sense of belonging may be threatened by bias, stereotyping, and systems of oppression and privilege. As a result, learning environments must be designed to help individuals navigate identity threats by actively affirming identities and being anti-oppressive, liberatory spaces. Finally, we differ in all kinds of deeply intertwined ways. These differences impact identity development, motivation, cognitive processing, and in turn, learning. One element of variability is one's life experiences. An individual's life experiences are critical to development. These experiences shape development, for better or for worse. They include our relationships, the environments that surround us, the nutrition we receive, and more. These experiences can be advantageous. For example, having secure and positive attachments with caregivers, living in environments free of toxins, eating healthy foods, and engaging in activities like sleep and exercise. Or they can be adverse. For example, unhealthy relationships, exposure to traumatic events or pollution, highly processed or inadequate food, and insufficient sleep. One's developmental state is also part of what makes them unique. While research suggests the shape of each child's growth is unique and nonlinear, it's still important to consider key physical, cognitive, emotional, and social shifts that occur across different life stages, such as early childhood, and adolescence. Finally, there is extensive variability in how individuals learn. Some of this variability stems from life experiences or the developmental state a learner is in. Other differences stem from variations in cognitive, social, and emotional traits and abilities. These are differences that may manifest in various ways as young people grow older, but likely will always be present in some way. While there's no single agreed-upon set of learning differences, many specialists break them into categories related to a learner's ability to read, write, work with numbers, direct attention, and engage executive functions. Together, these 4 factors, cognition, motivation, identity, and individual variability, influence how learning happens and in turn should inform the design of schools.
All right, we just threw a lot at you, right? 65 pages worth of synthesis in an 8-minute video, so I'm sure your own cognitive load is feeling a little bit taxed right now, potentially. But I want to give you some opportunities to make meaning of what you just listened to. The first is, I'm just curious if you could type into the chat, of those 4 things, those 4 big factors, cognition, motivation, identity, individual variability, which ones do you feel like were at play? I'm going to just give you a moment to reflect a little bit in your own challenge story, not your partner's, but your own. Which ones do you feel like might have been at play a little bit? Just brainstorm a little bit, think about it. Drop anything you're thinking about in the chat for a second. Seeing double motivation, lots of motivation. Individual variability and motivation. Got any cognition takers here? Any identity? Well, I'm going to now kind of unpack the story that you heard Megan tell at the beginning of the call today, and think about how those 4 factors were at play. And not surprisingly, as many of you have pointed out, I'm starting at the core of motivation. So in the story of Owen, I have 2 points here that really popped out to me, 2 questionings, 2 wonderings I had, because there's no way for me to know for sure. I'm kind of thinking and listening to her story and thinking about what that might have been like for Owen. The first is, I'm wondering if Owen would have seen more value in learning and in turn would have been more motivated if he had been able to do it with other people. There was something in that story where I was like, oh, he loves to engage with his peers. He loved to talk, basically. And I wonder if he just would have gotten more value, seen more value and been more motivated if there's some opportunity. I don't know what that opportunity could have been like. I'm not going to try to problem solve yet. But it seems like maybe there is something there. Another is, Did Owen actually feel a sense of self-efficacy as a writer? Did he believe he could actually do the work? I really wondered about those two things. Those are my like core kind of like starting kernels, wonderings I had. Now, the thing is that motivation's not the only factor that was at play here. And all of these four things are super deeply intertwined. So at the next level out, you could actually pull in all those other factors and say all those factors were also probably influencing his motivation and his sense of value and his sense that he could actually do the work. So if I jump up to cognition there in the upper right-hand corner, I realized that Megan said she just didn't have an opportunity to see his work very often. So that means he wasn't actually engaging in practice because he actually just wasn't even doing it, right? And that also meant that Megan didn't have a chance to give him high quality feedback. And the thing is, if you don't do that, you quickly don't have those small wins and you don't know how to get better. And so your sense of self-efficacy, I know my sense of self-efficacy would decrease and I wouldn't feel like I could do the work and then I wouldn't want to do the work. So it's not just motivation, there's actually this cognitive factor and the importance of feedback and practice that was also playing in. And then also, if we jump down to identity in the purple, it seems like what was actually happening is that maybe Owen was feeling such a low sense of self-efficacy that it was actually starting to shape his understanding of himself. He was actually starting to say, see himself as not a writer. And that was like part of his identity and part of the way he was going to live and engage in the world, which is going to shape, what he values. It was going to shape what he decides to prioritize. And we want students to have a firm self-understanding, but also if that self-understanding is in different ways negative, it can actually influence what motivates them and drives them. And the last thing is, it seems like Owen might have actually, this is going to this value point, had life experiences that had taught him that maybe like other forms of communication were just as valuable and just as important to him. And he wanted to talk and wanted to engage. And maybe his ability to express his ideas would have been amazing in that setting or in that mode, I should say. And there's a chance that maybe engaging with his grandmother, this is me totally inferring, maybe they had great conversations. Maybe they didn't spend a lot of time writing in that setting, right? But maybe he would have been able to express what he was reading about Night more clearly verbally as opposed to in writing. And there's a good chance that his life experiences taught him the sort of importance of different modes of communication. So I wrote all this out and talked through it to highlight that even though motivation seems like it was at the core, motivation just doesn't come from anywhere, right? It just doesn't like you're motivated, you're not. You're motivated because of all these things that make you who you are. You're motivated because of the way that learning is happening in your mind and the feedback you get, the opportunities you have to practice, the opportunities you have to really make meaning of what you are learning. And so all four of these factors are really deeply intertwined. In a moment, we're gonna go back into the breakout groups that you were in before. And you're gonna get an opportunity to recall the challenge that your partner shared earlier. And then with that same partner, you're gonna have 8 minutes to identify and discuss the factors that influenced your stories. We're going to share a one-pager that gives you an outline of all those different principles and all the details there if it's helpful to prompt your memory. But really, this is an encoding experience. It's an opportunity for you to meaningfully encode both what the challenge was and unpack it and apply some of these learning science principles to think about what was causing this challenge so that later on we can start to say, how might we address it and how might we solve it? So again, you're going to have 8 minutes and think about which principles impacted your partner's challenge. So you're kind of doing a reversal here. You're speaking about your partners, they're speaking about yours, and we're going to come back and do a little sharing at the end of those 8 minutes. Welcome back. I'm gonna give a few more seconds for folks to come back. I think there's probably, you get that notice, like you have a minute. Some people jump right back over and some people are like trying really hard to get those last few comments in before they get cut off mid-sentence. That happens to me. So, okay, looks like we got everybody back. Welcome back. Hopefully those were really rich and engaging conversations. hope you were able to build more on what you were saying in your first breakout group and really dig into that challenge more. I'd love to just briefly hear, hopefully there's a willing volunteer to talk about the remote challenge, your remote challenge, and the ahas or the questions that came up as you and your partner were kind of unpacking it and identifying the SOLD learning science principles that related to your challenge. Is there anybody who's willing to come off mute and share?
I can share.
Great, thank you.
So in our breakout room, we discussed the idea of motivation. We both had put motivation in the chat. And our big concept, and I'm sure we're not alone in this, is that when you're teaching over Zoom or trying to teach over Zoom, it's like teaching to the dead room. And you're not getting feedback, and you know, what are you doing with kids for that hour and a half? Or in elementary schools, you know, it could be a 4-hour session or something. So we started taking a look at your little cheat sheet and we started thinking that, you know, part of it is valued relationships with teachers, like that's going to motivate kids. And I really don't feel like I know my students at all this year. Like I know who they are, I know their names, kind of know a face, although behind the mask, it's kind of hard when they're, you know, in person, but I feel that that piece is lacking. And then we were comparing the spring to now, and in the spring, there was no motivation to do anything just because there were no grades, there was no new material. But I think kids are still struggling with this idea. But anyway, that's some of the stuff that we came up with.
Yeah, that's really important. And I think also I want to highlight, I'll say this again at the end, but we're going to be sharing, Megan's going to briefly introduce a collection of remote learning practices. Mm-hmm. And many of them are going to pull a lot on cognitive factors, but many of the other factors too. But I want to highlight that on our website, we also have collections on other things, including social and emotional support during this time. Mm-hmm. And it is like impossible to separate that out from the learning that happens. So even though we're going to dig into one collection here today, so many of the challenges that you probably mentioned could also be helpful to dig into that social and emotional collection. So we'll make sure that we also share that with you all too, even though today we're going to be focused exclusively on this collection of more kind of teaching and learning practices in the more strict sense.
Well, this is interesting. So my breakout room partner also said, which I thought was really interesting, and maybe she can elaborate, but I guess her own son, who's doing remote learning as a kindergartner, just had his mind blown that you could actually do school at home. Like, what's that about? So that was just because I teach high school. So I was like, wow, that was interesting.
School is such a place. Awesome. I'm going to pass it over to Megan then to introduce this collection that we're going to go deeper into.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for thinking so deeply about your current practice and thinking about SOLD. As Cynthia said, we're focusing on one curated collection today, but we do have 3 other ones, which are listed here. They're on our website and publicly available, but we'll find a way to get them to you for easy access as well. But I wanted to think about how do we make these resources? Where do they come from? So how we make these collections and many of our other resources at Transcend is we first listen to a need. And in this case, that was a need for quality remote instruction. How do we do it? And we also think about Transcend's mission to create equitable, extraordinary learning environments. And we take that need and then we lean on research. So that could be academic research, that could be expert organizations. In this case, it's SOLD. And we also look to our school partners and we ask them, what are they doing well already related to the need? And we look at various schools across the field. And then we take that together and we synthesize it and we come up with a resource that's both practical and useful and leans heavily into equity. So for this collection, that synthesis and those insights gelled into the 15 practices that you see listed here. We came up with a description of each practice and then also some artifacts, like direct, exact things that schools across the country are doing related to these practices to give some inspiration. And the purpose of this resource is that teachers can take it and you can implement it in your classrooms tomorrow. Well, not tomorrow because we're right before a break, but when you come back from break, you can implement them. And for leaders, you can bring this to your teaching staff and collaboratively decide what makes sense to implement and how you'll do it. And the point is that we really want you to have the ability to implement these things and some examples of how to do it, but also that you're able to then monitor your progress and to continue to evolve the learning environment so that all students can thrive, especially at a difficult time like now. So you'll have access to this entire collection, all of the practices. But today we're just going to zoom into 3 of them because we want you to learn how to use the collection so you can take it and use it in whatever way is most applicable to your context. And before we dive into those practices, we want to acknowledge that there's a ton of collective expertise in this room. So we're going to make this section a little interactive. As I explain each practice, think about how well you or your school community are currently implementing the practice. And then we're going to put out a poll and you can share with the group so that we can all see how we can maybe learn from each other in our breakout groups. And it will also help you think about when you select a breakout group, like, I'm not doing a great job right now with this one, so I want to learn more. You'll have the opportunity to do that as well. So we dive in. Feedback. As educators, we'll all do feedback. We share insights about student learning back with them, but not all feedback is created equal, and quality and cadence really matter. So to optimize equity and learning, feedback should happen regularly, and it should happen as soon as possible after feedback so that it's fresh in students' minds. We want it to be specific, so like for each student and for each specific task, but it can be short and sweet. And we want to also focus on students' strengths so that feedback is also motivating. A last thing is that feedback should focus on not just the artifact in front of you, but also students' process. So helping them understand the decisions that they made, maybe how they organized themselves in order to complete the task. And we also want to give them opportunities to then roll that feedback forward and try it in new contexts. In the example you see here, this is a teacher from Achievement First who does virtual 10-minute mini conferences with her students. This essay is in process, and she starts every conference by affirming students, acknowledging that the assignment is hard, and giving feedback and a strategy for growth that they can then roll forward. So think about it. How well are you currently implementing regular, timely feedback?
Got about 50% of participants. I'll just leave it up for another 10 more seconds. Okay, closing out in 3, 2, 1.
Okay, it seems like the majority of folks are saying they are doing this FAIR. I'm going to ask folks to hold on to this idea. Why did you select FAIR? Because we're going to ask folks in our next breakout room to share more about why you selected this practice. There's also a big cluster around good as well.
Great. The next one is structured student choice. So young people learn in many different ways. And one way that we can help honor that is by giving choice over how learning happens. And that means when and with whom and where and what and how and all of those W's. Choice can be offered in so many different ways. How to engage with content, like giving podcasts and videos and cartoons and things to analyze. We can also give students opportunities with how they do that. So do they work with a partner? Do they work in a small group? Do they work independently? Do they work with the teacher? And we can also support students in making good choices for themselves by asking them questions before they make a selection and also asking them to reflect on how appropriate the choice was afterwards. One thing that's important about choice is that we want to make sure that we are limiting and structuring it. I get absolutely paranoid by choice. Like if someone says, what do you want to eat for dinner? I'll go into a tailspin. I need to know like 2 or 3 options and then I can figure out what is best for me. And in the same way, we should be curating and offering students like selected tasks. In this example, it's from West Warwick High School in Rhode Island. And this teacher actually gives a few choices for how students can demonstrate their learning. And those examples are linked there because she's also supporting them in case they might not know how to use it yet. There's a tutorial so that everyone has equal opportunity to use different types of learning assessments. So poll number 2, how well are you currently implementing structured student choice?
So again, even with this one, it seems like we have more folks who are hovering around fair. I'm also going to invite folks, as you're thinking about your implementation, to also start to think about how SOLD is connecting to these practices. In your breakout, we're going to ask you to reflect on how are the factors and principles at play and how you might play up some of those factors to better support your implementation of these practices.
Great. And our last practice for today is leveled tasks. So level tasks are ones that offer varying complexity so that all students have equitable access to rigorous learning. It is a form of differentiation and it does lend itself to work well virtually. It might mean creating 3 different tasks at 3 different levels for students. And I know, like, as a special education teacher, I was always differentiating, and sometimes that scared me because it meant more work, but it doesn't have to. Level tasks can also be one task that is, they're called low floor, high ceiling tasks, so that all students can access it, but they can take their learning as far as feels right and challenging for them. Some teachers might like to assign students to different groups based on their readiness, but we can also support students to self-select and to reflect on whether or not their choices were best serving them after the fact. In this example, it's from a school in Hong Kong called Sha Tin Junior School, and the teachers call the different groups learning zones, and you can see they're color-coded here. There are 3 different tasks. And they actually use formative data to suggest a learning zone for students. But if a student's feeling sassy one day and instead of the purple learning zone, they want to go into the green zone, they're free to do that. But there's always a check for understanding afterwards so students can reflect on their choices. How well are you doing level tasks at this moment?
So it seems like this one, in terms of the 3 practices that we shared so far, folks are feeling the least successful in terms of their implementation with this current practice. We have about 1/3 around we're currently not doing this, and about 62%, so almost 2/3 of folks around fair. So what we're going to invite folks to do now, you're going to be able to self-select your own working group at a moment to explore these practices even more. I hope you're noticing the SOLD factors and principles at play with allowing some choice in what you're going to do next. So based on the topic you want to explore, you're going to rename yourself. So just in the same way you renamed yourself at the start of our session to update your pronouns, you're going to update your name so it has the number of the group you want to join in front of it. So for example, I'm going to be 2 Shari because I will be joining the student choice group. So I'm going to pause and give folks just a moment to update their names. And if you need any support with updating your name, just share which group you would like to join in our Zoom chat, and Marielle will be able to assign you to the correct group.
Great. And while you're taking a little bit more time to choose your groups and Marielle's getting our breakout group set up, I will start to tee us up for how we'll use that time together in our groups. So first, you'll introduce yourselves and you can share a little bit about why you've decided to choose this group. It might just be a really high level overview of your challenge. And then you'll take about 10 minutes to read through the practice and to check out some of the examples and the artifacts. You can see the example from Sha Tin Junior School here on the slide. That's what it looks like. So I would say to choose one or two for now, just based on time, that feel like really relevant to your context or are just really exciting to you. And while you're going through those artifacts, we're going to ask you to consider 3 questions. Firstly, in what ways does this practice support SOLD and which resources really make that pop for you? Secondly, how might you use this practice in your teaching right away? We want you to think that this is really practical and useful and something that you can roll forward. And also any outstanding questions that you still have either about the practice or SOLD, this is a space for you to dive into those. After that, we'll have about 10 minutes to discuss your answers as a group. And you can share your expertise and your thoughts. And there will also be a Transcend facilitator in each group who will help guide your conversation. You can tackle these questions and this time in breakout groups in whatever way makes most sense for you. We will give you a Google Doc if you are somebody who loves to type and put your thoughts down on the computer. If you're someone like me and you scribble everywhere, feel free to use a piece of scrap paper. Or if you just hold thoughts in your head, that's totally fine too. We want you to be able to engage in a way that works best for you. All right, so when Marielle's ready, she'll send us into, oh, sorry, just kidding. One more quick reminder before Marielle sends us into breakout groups is to bring back the community agreements that we leaned into. We're going to have some time and space now to do some processing. And so we just want to invite you to remember what agreements that you chose to lean into today and to bring that into the space as you have conversations with your peers. Ready when you are.
Okay, opening them up now. Stop share. Welcome back. There's about 10 seconds left that we're given these breakout rooms, so I'll just give them those last few seconds.
Welcome back, everyone. It feels like it is never enough time. I feel like we were just starting to really get into some of the practices and resources that were available. But fortunately, you will have more time on your own to explore those resources. You will have full access to these materials. Before I jump into our next steps, including the survey and goodie bag, really quickly would love to hear from folks any ahas that came up for you or new ideas that were sparked or any inspiration you're having coming out of your small group conversations. Feel free to take yourself off mute and share. Marielle, could you actually stop sharing the screen? I'd love to see everyone's face right now.
I think especially when we were talking about motivation and then we saw that graphic of like how they're all connected to motivation, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Like it actually is like partly this and partly that and all connected. I was like, yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the questions we tend to get when we introduce SOLD is like, are we attending to all of the principles? Like, how do you do that? It's so much, right? But I think the way Cynthia analyzed Megan's learning story is like figuring out what is the core thing that's at play and what are some other secondary principles that might be interacting with that core idea as well.
Just building off of that, especially the way we perceive things. Like I might perceive it as motivation, but it's not. and other
Exactly.
adults too.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Kayla. The idea of like what biases are we bringing to what students are showing up with and bringing to the situation. And it's a good check for ourselves to take a step back and really analyze what's happening. Would
I
love to
think-
hear. Mhm.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think for me, I think I might have frozen again. I can't tell. Can anybody hear me?
We can hear you, but your face
okay.
isn't moving, but you're good.
Okay, just being more actively aware of how identity plays a role. I feel like sometimes for me, I'm not doing that as much as I should be, and I need to be more aware and more empathetic and, you know, just always having the equity piece in mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially given this time that we're in, right? 2020 is throwing so many things at us, and it's doing the same for our students and their families as well. So any extra attention and care we can attend to in terms of their individual variability and also their identity as we're designing learning experiences for them will make it that much richer. And so we have 2 minutes left. And with that, I want to bring us to our goodie bag and a couple of quick next steps. So Marielle, in a moment, is going to share in our Zoom chat a link to our swag bag. I hope you guys are excited about the swag bag as I am. Cynthia spent time animating it. It's amazing. In the swag bag, you will have access to the curated collection that we shared during today's workshop. You'll also have access to the Sold primer that Cynthia mentioned was about 60 plus pages that she truncated into that 8-minute video for you all. And just as a shout out, Cynthia is the lead author of that document. So kudos to Cynthia. You'll also have digital access to our Sold cards, which is just another format of the primer, a link to today's deck. And we also put in there a link to Transcend's 10 Leaps for Equitable 21st Century Learning. This isn't a resource that we talked about, but this is a resource that really anchors a lot of Transcend's work and the work that we do with our partners. It describes the leaps that we believe schools must make in order to shift from the industrial style learning to equitable transformative learning. So definitely take a look at those as well. And those leaps are heavily informed by some of the key learnings from the science of learning and development. In addition, you'll get a promo code that's just for you all to order any of the physical resources that you would like. I believe the promo code is good until the end of January. And with that, I want to say thank you to everyone for joining us. If this was engaging for you all, I definitely invite you to explore our website. We also have a community where we work with educators just like you all across the country. It's called Transcend's Design Community. You can find out more about that on our website and feel free to sign up so we can continue to have these conversations. Thank you all for your time this evening. Have a great rest of your week. And I hope 2021 is better for everyone. See you all.
Thank you guys so much for everything. Cynthia and Shari and Marielle and Megan. It's just been a pleasure to be with you. And it's a pleasure to always be with our ECLC community, and wishing everybody a happy and safe holiday. And we'll see you next year, as they say.
Yes. And don't forget to take the survey. It's in the Zoom chat. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you to our presenters. And if you have to jump off, just click on the survey so you can do it later. Take care, everybody.
Back for the holidays. Thank you.
Bye. It's great to
Bye.
meet you all.
Take care, everyone.